Hi everyone. In today's technique, I need to come up with a name for this, don't I? Technique, techie, tech. In today's technique tutorial, I am going to give you some hints and tricks to work with some yarn overs, okay? Since I'm gearing up to do a lace shawl, I'm going to be doing a lot of yarn overs, and I just want to give you a few tips and tricks to make sure that your yarn overs are what you're looking for, and to help you do yarn overs, generally speaking. So if you're a total beginner knitter, you might be wondering what a yarn over is for. If you're doing lace stitches, then a yarn over is a way for you to create basically a hole to create open work. So I've got one over here. Yeah, so I've got a hole in my knitting. This is on purpose. This is on purpose. And for really beginner knitters, if you find that you have holes that look like that in your knitting, it's probably because you have a yarn over. So how do you do a yarn over? It's actually pretty simple. When you're working in stocking stitch, so stockinette stitch, knits on the front, purl on the back, what you're going to do is you're just going to take your yarn and you're going to bring it in between your needles and up over. So that way your yarn's in the front, kind of like what you would do to purl, right? But instead, you're going to just go ahead and knit. And you'll notice that I've added a stitch here. And that stitch creates a hole. So that's how this stitch was created. So when you come back around, and you purl that stitch, it is going to look like that on the front side. And you'll have a hole. If you put those in the quote-unquote right places, you can get different designs like leaves and other works. This does... Oh, my cord is getting in the way. This does increase the amount of stitches here, because what happened is that I brought my yarn... I'll just undo this. If I hold 5 stitches between my fingers here, so I've got 2 on this side, 3 on this side. If I do a yarn over and knit one, I now have 2 on one side and 4 on the other. That created a yarn over. That yarn over creates a new stitch. In your lace work, assuming your yarn overs aren't the increased stitches, you're probably going to have a decrease at some point in that row, since this does increase the amount of stitches that are on your work. So just keep that in mind when you're working with yarn overs. So sometimes you'll notice that your yarn over doesn't work. If you brought your yarn to the front and you purled and your yarn over disappeared. So the reason for that is because when you're doing the yarn over and you're knitting afterwards, your yarn needs to be in the back. So in order for you to knit, you need to bring your yarn back and around your needle. And that creates that extra stitch. Now the tricky thing is that if you're trying to do a yarn over and your next stitch is a purl, so I've done a couple purls here, if you bring your yarn to the front and purl, you're just doing a regular old purl. So what you need to keep in mind when you're working yarn overs with purls is you're not just bringing it to the back, because you're just knitting then. What you need to do is bring your yarn to the front, because that's what your next stitch would be, right, since you're purling. And then what you'll actually be doing is you're going to wrap your yarn around your needle to create that extra stitch, and then purl. And that's how you create your yarn over into a purl. So something you'll want to keep in mind is that your tension between your yarn overs that go into a knit stitch and the yarn over that goes into a purl stitch, the tension will be different. Your purl stitch ones, leading into the purl stitch, that one will be a little looser. And the reason for that, when you are doing your yarn over for a knit stitch, you're just bringing yarn to the front and then you're knitting. So what's happening is that the stitch is coming from, we'll say, if we were to look at the point of the needle like a clock face, the stitch is going from effectively 5 o'clock and coming all the way back around to 7 o'clock. So it's not making a full rotation around your needle. Whereas when you are moving into a purl, you're going from 5 o'clock all the way back on over to 5 o'clock to purl. So there's a little bit more yarn going into your yarn over, going into your purl stitch. So just keep that in mind. It doesn't usually pop up, because when you do your yarn overs, like, you're going to be doing the same kind of yarn overs all the way across the row. But if you're doing a complicated lace pattern that has knits and purls in the same row, and then you have to come back and do knits and purls in the opposite row, you might, if you want to make sure that your eyelets, like the little holes caused by the yarn overs, are really well tensioned, you'll want to make sure that your yarn overs leading into knit stitches are a little bit looser than the ones leading into purl stitches. So now let's say we were knitting along and we've accidentally added a yarn over. So I've got a yarn over here that's not supposed to be here. How do you fix that? The easiest way to fix it is to drop it from your needle. You will have a longer stitch here, and what you're going to do is after you're finished working the stitch and finishing that row, you're going to go back and take a tapestry needle or another needle, and you're just going to retension your stitches to distribute that extra little bit of yarn across a number of stitches. I tend to like to distribute it across 10 stitches or so that way it's really hard to see. So now let's say you're working your pattern and you realize, oh no, I forgot a yarn over. If you're on the back side like I am here now, you can lift your stitch, mount it the way that your stitch would be, which is always leading from your working needle up over the back to your offhand needle there. And that's how you want to mount your stitch. And then you can just knit it or purl it or however you need to work that stitch. That will result in a smaller eyelet, which you can then retension later. But that is a quick way to fix that problem. So now let's say, all right, so next little repair tip. Let's say you didn't realize that you forgot your yarn over until your next right side row. A lot of, I hesitate to say basic lace patterns because lace patterns don't usually ever feel basic, but some of the more simplistic patterns is you'll be doing a lot of work on the front side, and then the back side is usually just purls. So when you're doing that type of lace, you're just purling every stitch that you see. So you're not really paying attention to what's going on, at least I don't. So if you come across a point where, you know, in your pattern, there's supposed to be a yarn over it that doesn't exist, what you can do is take a crochet hook. I tend to like to use a crochet hook that's a couple sizes smaller than the needles. I'm using a 4.5 right now for my needles, and I have a 3.5 millimeter hook. Yeah, so all you need to do is, I'm gonna try to do this so that way you can see exactly what I'm doing. You'll see we've got the ladders here in your work, right? If you've forgotten to do a yarn over, what you can do is take your hook, insert it between the third and second from the top, so 1, 2, 3, in here, between these two stitches, these two ladders, and what you're going to do is you're going to pull on that stitch a little bit, and you're going to lift it up and over your first stitch, the top stitch there. And then what I do is I rotate my hook, so that way I can grab that stitch, and you're just going to bring it up and put that stitch on your needle. Now you've got an eyelet. This is the tightest eyelet that you'll have. You can fix this by, again, basically you're going to steal tension from the stitches on either side to open up this eyelet a little bit. To make this, hide this perfectly, what you'll actually need to do is retension 2 different rows of your work by stealing tension from, 10 stitches on either side, because you only want to steal a tiny little bit of tension from each one. So that way that mistake is hidden a little bit better. If you come across where you have created a yarn over where you're not supposed to, you have an eyelet where you're not supposed to have, you can drop these stitches. But then what you're going to have is 2 really elongated ladders here. So what you'll want to do is after you finish knitting a row or 2, you'll want to go back and retension those stitches so that way you can hide that tension issue that you've got there because there's too much stitches. So again, when you retention, 10 stitches, maybe 20 depending on how fine the lace is or how much yarn you need to hide on either side. So that way there's not a huge change between the stitches. And then once you're done, you just kind of like wiggle your stitches a little bit for them to sit comfortably, and the ladder will all but disappear. I hope you found this little tutorial on how to add and remove and fix different yarn overs, and I hope you find it useful as a resource for when you jump into your next lace project or your first lace project. I'll see you next week. Bye.